If you routinely find your diet going to shit when you're on trips away, whether it be a vacation, a business trip, etc., this is completely normal. Now, what's likely happening is that you're trying to hold yourself to the same standards that you would have for yourself when you're in stable conditions. So when you're at home, you have access to your own kitchen. And even aside from, those very obvious things of being able to prepare your own food, which you may or may not be able to do when you're on the road, there's also the less obvious taxing of your faculties when you're in stable environments. When you go on a trip away, right, you've got all this new stimulation that your brain needs to process, and it needs to figure out simple things like, the public transport. It needs to figure out, what's this funny language all these people are speaking? How do I make sense of this new architecture? And what are the customs here? There's all this background processing going on that we're often not even aware of. And then if we're thinking about things like, I got to hit 180 grams of protein or whatever it is, and I got to hit my macros this way, and I got to get this amount of calories, and I got to get fiber in, and da-da-da-da-da. It's just such a level of overthinking that's not necessary, especially if your goal is something as simple as fat loss, or if on a trip away, your only goal is damage control, where you want to come back and just not have gained weight. It's going to make much more sense here to have like a little travel toolkit, a different way of operating that you only employ when you're on the road. I wish I had this when I was in my previous career. So we used to run these events for basically bringing together large tech companies like, the likes of, actually I won't name them. Just think of like the big Fortune 500 tech companies, the ones that have been around for years, and then some of the more recent phenomenons during the internet age. Those kind of companies, bringing them together, representatives from those companies together, where they would discuss emerging technologies, right? So at the time, it was the Internet of Things. Then it started changing towards digital twins, artificial intelligence, etc. So like the researchers, the people who are advising the approach that these large organizations need to carry into the future. It was those kind of people we were bringing together. And when you're in those environments, you realize that when many professionals are on business trips, they're completely up in their head. They're living in, and they're being rewarded in many ways at these kind of trips. When you are going to make deals or things like that, it's often a lot of future projection. It's a lot of future thinking. It's living up in your mind. It's actually not being where your feet are much of the time, and you want to try and get back into that present moment awareness as much as you can. And it was really funny for me to hear, at the dinner table, you'd hear many people who were completely out of shape, oftentimes, not so funnily, struggling with chronic health conditions that were of the metabolic kind, to do with like heart disease, diabetes, etc., which is definitely no laughing matter. But what was kind of funny from my perspective, because I was so well schooled all along on fitness and nutrition, I'd hear them speaking about, what the perfect diet is, and there'd be disagreement at the table, and they'd be saying things like, sugar is poison, or they'd be saying things like, you should only eat once per day, that's more ancestral, or, meat is bad, or the ketogenic diet is better. And then I'd be watching them, and their actions were completely disconnected from what they were saying. They're discussing the most optimal diet in a hypothetical, theoretical world, while also slamming multiple beers, eating all the gluten, all of the things that they were professing to not be so good for the human condition. And this is where, when you're on the road, you want to trade. And actually, this is not even just when you're on the road, but in most circumstances, you want to trade what is hypothetically optimal for what is realistically practical within your current constraints, within your lifestyle. With most of my clients, when they're in their stable environments, so these are people now who are, high performers, many of them own their own business, or they're in a decision-making capacity within their organization. When they're at home, sure, I have a much better chance of getting them to track their calories. You know, we make use of tools like AI to help in that process because they're still time strapped even when they're in their regular environment. But we don't have the same kind of taxing of their decision making, of their willpower, etc., when they're in their stable environment because they're operating more out of habit. Okay, they're operating more on like the brain's autopilot. There's less resources being used. Whereas when you're on the road and you're traveling, a lot of that goes out the window. Right? It makes much more sense to just adopt some kind of arbitrary rule. It could be that you say, okay, I fast in the morning. It could be that you avoid carbohydrates. The one I personally find the most beneficial, the most useful, the most realistic for me is to eat 2 large meals. So I'll maybe have like a large mid-morning breakfast because in the morning I might just get a coffee and walk around exploring the sites. Have a nice large mid-morning breakfast that I can sit down and enjoy, then forget about food for most of the day. And then in the evening, have a nice social meal. So whether that's with friends that I'm traveling to meet, or it's with potential clients, or it's with, you know, in my previous life, whether it would have been with business colleagues, that you can, you know, enjoy that. Because breaking bread at the end of a work day or whatever, it's all part of doing business. It's part of connection. You know, it's ritualistic. And I think to downplay that in favor of being quote unquote optimal is only going to shoot you in the foot long term. You're going to eventually rebound in a catastrophic way. And this is the cycle I see many people go through. They don't create alignment in their life. Okay, so they try to go for the perfect thing that looks great on paper. And when you're perfectly motivated to change, it seems doable. But then that motivated state, it wears off because it's a drug-like state. You know, you've got elevated levels of dopamine in the brain, and you think that you're going to have that same level of motivation week after week, which does not happen. And then people get completely disillusioned with the whole process of training, following a healthy diet, and then they binge, they give up, they forget about it completely, they kind of they shelve it for a bit and say, I'll come back to this at another point. And then they keep kicking the can down the road further and further. The smarter way to do this is to create alignment. And yes, that may mean that you're not getting the same 12-week transformation that you see being advertised online. It might take you a year to get the same kind of transformation that, you know, some guy working in the local cafe can get in 12 weeks with his coach, because he doesn't have the same amount of decisions to make in a day. Maybe his career is not as complex. And I'm not bashing that job by any stretch of the imagination. It's a vital role in society to provide service. But what I'm trying to get at is that if you have a career where there's a lot of moving parts, where there's a lot of change, where your environment changes on the regular, where your responsibilities on a given day change, where you're responsible for a lot of decisions, and you've got a lot of things running around in the background, you're going to have to extend the time horizon of your goals. And you're going to have to just be okay with that. Because life is all about trade-offs. And the more things that you try to achieve within your life, and the more you spread your energy laterally, the more you have to accept that it's going to take a lot longer for each thing to bear fruit, to materialize. So then it makes more sense to actually just start off with focusing on the habits and focusing on how can I make those habits realizable no matter how my schedule changes. And that's what I do with my clients on the High Performer Fitness Transformation. This is where we build the habits that you're going to have for a lifelong result. And I work intensively with my clients on a one-to-one basis, on a daily basis. I don't get my clients, doing the weekly check-ins, filling in the spreadsheets, any of that stuff. All of that exists in my head. The plan exists in my head. To my clients, I'm like a concierge, a PA, and their coach all rolled into one, where my job is to keep all the overthinking and excess decision-making out of their brain And the easiest way to do that is with more frequent bite-sized communication. And maybe you try this the next time you're on the road. Try it. Just have 2 meals, 2 large meals in the day. It doesn't have to be breakfast and dinner. It could be lunch and dinner. Again, adapt it to your own situation and your needs. Maybe you're meeting colleagues for lunch. Maybe you're trying to close a deal at lunch. Who knows? But then rely on your intuition to fill in the gaps. Right? So to keep you on track with your caloric intake. And then when you get back to your stable environment, yeah, you can move the needle a little bit more from suboptimal closer towards optimal. But you got to realize that any kind of optimal diet, any kind of optimal body type, any kind of optimal shape, it's an ideal. And it's a useful ideal. You know, humans have always historically come up with ideals that help move us in a particular direction. But the problem is that when we turn those ideals into quote unquote false gods, you know, when we start beating ourselves up for not living up to an ideal that's not actually realistic for any one human to achieve within their lifetime. And particularly not if you're trying to optimize across many different domains.